Did you know there's a group called White Women for Kamala? Kind
Errands
of.
for Kamala.
Parents for Kamala. Yeah, last Thursday they had over 164,000 women come together on a Zoom call. And it was called White Women Answer the Call to support Kamala. And they raised over 2 million in donations.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic. And we are unapologetically outspoken. Hey, everybody. Happy Monday. We hope you guys had an awesome weekend. And before we dive into today's podcast, we just want to say a big thank you to Workin' Man Vibes for our latest review on Apple Podcasts. And we really appreciate the support. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Keep the reviews coming. We got to counter these crazy lefties that are coming for us now. So as much as it pains me to say, Tara, we're going to have to talk about Kamala. We just have to address the elephant in the room because there's so much, dare I say, misinformation out there. But I mean, I was thinking about it. I'm like, okay, over the past 4 years, she's basically been hiding. Like, we haven't seen her. We haven't heard of anything she's done to help with any issue, whether it's the border or inflation. And other than the occasional embarrassing cackle or like the gaffe that went viral where she said that we were allies with North Korea, other than like those instances, she really hasn't received much media attention. They've kind of just like hidden her away in a corner somewhere. And I feel like she's basically been collecting a government paycheck. But now, all of a sudden, she's the best politician in the world and she's plastered across every news network and social media platform. And it's just kind of funny. Like, you have to laugh at the fact that the party that refuses to define what a woman is now says, well, we must vote for her because she's a woman.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this isn't 2020, and I think people are sick of the virtue signaling bullshit. I know I am, and I don't think that the identity politics is going to work this time. And let's also remember that she's still in the honeymoon period, and once people become familiar with her policy views and her past, I think it's going to turn off a lot of like those centrist and independent voters. So I wanted to take a look at the facts about her past and things that she has said publicly so that people can truly understand what we would be getting with a Harris presidency. So the biggest thing going around social media right now about Kamala is that she got into power because of an affair that she had with Willie Brown, who was married at the time. People were saying he was kind of like the mob boss of California type deal. And Morning Wire covered this in depth and said that Brown helped her get appointed to 2 board positions that she allegedly wasn't qualified to have, which was the California Insurance Appeals Board and the Medical Assistance Commission. That gave her a salary of around $400,000. So she went from being like an assistant attorney to 2 board positions because of this affair. And then he
And
helped her get elected. What?
and this was in the early 2000s too, that she was making this kind of money.
Yeah. So adjusted for inflation, they were saying it would be like having $1 million salary in today's world, which is just insane. And then I guess he helped get her elected as San Francisco district attorney in 2004. And then in 2010, she ran for attorney general of California and won. And I guess it was her office that created Prop 47, which we've talked about in past episodes, but that was basically the thing that lessened penalties for crime. And get this is so ludicrous, but she even decided to prosecute parents for truancy. I didn't know this, but you can hear directly from her in this clip. So listen to this.
I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my reelection race. But I said, look, I'm done. This is a serious issue and I've got a little political capital and I'm going to spend some of it. So I sent a letter out on my letterhead to every parent in the school district, my homicide prosecutors, my gang prosecutors, And they went over there and I said, when you go over there, look really mean. And so they did. And invariably the parent said, well, who's the mean looking dude? And the principal would say, well, that's someone that mean DA Kamala Harris sent over here because she said she's going to start prosecuting you if we can't work this out.
Okay, so pretty typical of California politicians that want to go after parents. But can she get through one sentence without fucking laughing? That cackle, like it's so bad. It's every sentence. Oh gosh. Okay, so perhaps the most egregious part of her past was what she did to two journalists that went undercover and exposed Planned Parenthood for illegally selling aborted baby parts. So, as Attorney General, her office ordered a raid on the home of one of the journalists. And instead of charging Planned Parenthood, she indicted the two journalists, and they were charged with 15 counts of violating state invasion of privacy laws that prohibit the recording of conversations without consent. And then a Superior Court judge dismissed some of those criminal charges. But even though these journalists had video of Planned Parenthood offering to illegally sell aborted baby parts for profit, Planned Parenthood argued, oh, the video was just edited, and they only decided to show the discussion related to reimbursement for the baby parts. They never denied that. They were just like, oh, they edited it. And in addition to criminal charges for the journalists, Planned Parenthood ends up suing them, and the journalists get ordered to pay $2.3 million in damages for violating federal and state laws by trespassing on private property and secretly recording video of others without their consent. And like, Tara, the craziest part about this whole thing is it is wiped clean of the internet. Like we were talking about in the other episode we did. And all you see now are these fact check articles. So this information came from a Snopes fact check article. And I don't know about you, but the facts don't seem too good for Kamala in this case. It sounds pretty egregious to me. But it happened, and it's out there. So I want to also talk about like just how extreme left she is. And so just like a flashback to the Democrat primary debate in 2020, she was called the most liberal senator, even left of Bernie Sanders, who is a socialist. Like he is outright publicly a socialist. So I found a mashup video with multiple instances of Kamala making it crystal clear that she's not about equality, but equity, which means she doesn't want equal opportunity for all. She wants equal outcomes for all. So let me play that clip.
About a goal of saying everybody should end up in the same place. And since we didn't start in the same place, some folks might need more. Equitable distribution. Giving resources based on equity, understanding that we fight for equality, but we also need to fight for equity, understanding not everyone starts out at the same place. So there's a big difference between equality and equity. Equality suggests often everybody should get the same thing. Well, that often assumes everybody started out in the same place, as opposed to equity, which is everyone should end up in the same place. And if you then understand not everybody started out in the same place, you understand some people need more. So we all end up in the same place, right? We are proud of the fact that equity is one of our guiding principles. Proud of the fact that we understand equality is important, but not everybody starts out on the same base. We see that people in our country are having an experience that is not equal. So when we talk about the work we are doing here together, it is recognizing that and being guided by this principle of what we must do in the spirit and in the interest of equity. To put equity firmly at the center of our economic policy. But no, if you look at the reality of who will benefit from certain policies, when you take into account that they're not starting at the same place and they're not starting on equal footing, it will directly benefit Black children, Black families, Black homeowners.
Okay, Tara, Is it just me, or does that sound like pure communism?
Yeah, 100%. And I'm
It's
sorry, but all this equity nonsense hasn't done anything to benefit Black families or Black communities.
no. And I think people at this point are pretty freaking sick of hearing about equity. Now, I found another clip from C-SPAN, and this is of Kamala as a senator sounding like a complete nut job, where she's grilling acting ICE director Ronald Vitiello on whether ICE, which of course Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is similar to the KKK. This is during an official hearing. It's just freaking unbelievable. So listen to this.
But the people just love him. Guy,
Oh,
we had
hang on.
people lining up to
Wrong
get
clip.
into the
Sorry, hang on. Let me find the right one. Here we go.
Ku Klux Klan, the KKK.
well, the Klan was what we would call today a domestic terrorist group.
Why? Why would we call them domestic terrorist group?
Because they tried to use fear and force to change political environment.
And what was the motivation for the use of fear and
It was
force?
based on race and ethnicity.
Right. Are you aware of the perception of many about how the power and the discretion at ICE is being used to enforce the laws? And do you see any parallels?
I do not see any parallels between
I'm talking about perception.
officers and agents.
I'm talking about perception.
I do not see a parallel between what is constitutionally mandated as it relates to enforcing the law.
Are you aware that there's a
Right. I
perception?
see no.
Are you aware that there's a
that puts
perception?
ICE in the same category as the KKK. Is that what you're asking me?
No, I'm very specific about what I'm asking you. Are you aware of a perception that the way that the discretion
I see no parallel.
I'm not
I
finished.
see none.
I'm not finished. I'm not finished. Are you aware that there's a perception that ICE is administering its power in a way that is causing fear and intimidation, particularly among immigrants and specifically among immigrants coming from Mexico and Central America? Are you aware of that perception?
I do not see a parallel between the power and the authority that ICE has to do its job and the agents and officers who do it professionally and excellently with lots of compassion.
Sir, how can you be the head of an agency and be unaware? And it is harmful in terms of leading those who are innocent people arriving at our border, fleeing harm. It is harmful to them. Ku Klux Klan.
Okay, wow. So when they try to spin it and say that Kamala is helping the border crisis, just remember she thinks ICE is the KKK.
Okay, you just pointed out a lot of really important facts that people should be paying attention to about Kamala and her history. And it's undeniable that she would be the absolute worst choice. Like, if we have any chance of climbing out of the hole that Biden has dug for us over the past 4 years. But I'm going to play devil's advocate this episode, and I'm going to focus on the opposing narrative because the question is this: will this knowledge and then, what we've been hearing on our favorite podcasts, all our top podcast hosts for the last week, is any of this going to make a difference? Because as you said earlier, and we saw it in real time on our episode on Friday, the information about Kamala that they don't want out there is being erased from the internet. Why? Because the MSM is aligned with the left, and Kamala is basically their Hail Mary attempt to retain power. And I don't know if you watched, Ben Shapiro did a 3-part docuseries called Skamala, whatever you want to call it. And it details pretty much everything you just talked about. But one of the things that fascinated me watching it was seeing the transition from the last clip you just played, prosecutor Kamala, right? Where she's at least, she sounds fucking stupid because she doesn't know what she's talking about. But she's at least pretending to project this sense of seriousness and authority and leadership ability. How does she turn from that into the cackling Dr. Seuss rhymes, drunk wine aunt, sorority girl persona that we see today? And as much as we can make fun of that and point out how completely useless she is as a leader and how she's accomplished absolutely nothing during the last 4 years, the MSM is using this to their advantage because they're highlighting her personality as being youthful and fun. And this is why she's connecting primarily with women and young voters and people of color. And we have to remember these are huge demographics and could swing the vote, especially within the Democrat and independent populations. And last week, I pointed out what Ben Carson said in his interview with Tucker about how the outcome of the election will come down to the persuasive power of the MSM. And I do think this is a huge factor. But I also think that what the MSM is doing with this massive show of support for Kamala and like erasing and debunking her history as misinformation or disinformation and highlighting her age, her race, and her gender, like this is all part of the plan to commit massive election fraud. And this focus on leading us to believe that Kamala is now surging ahead in the polls is the classic conditioning that you and I always talk about, with like priming us to believe that if she actually wins, it was a legitimate election. And almost every article that I've read in the MSM that talks about her sudden rise in popularity is attributing it to the fact that we have young people, minorities, and women who are all connecting with Kamala in a way that they didn't connect with Biden. And despite the fact that I support Trump 100%, even you and I have talked at length on this podcast about how we need to get rid of all the old fucks in Congress, have age and term limits, have the country be led by someone who isn't like well past retirement age. And what have we seen for the past 4 years? Biden, the doddering old man, descending into the depths of senility and dementia, and Trump, who, although he has his full faculties, and he's clearly capable of leading the country, he's also 81 years old, and people are sick of old men being in charge of the country. So here comes Kamala, and the MSM is highlighting the narrative that all the people on the left who were on the fence because of Biden's age and mental decline, well, now they're all excited about the possibility of the country being led by someone who's younger, a female, and a minority. Like she has the trifecta that's appealing to the left. And they don't care what her policies are. She's attracting hordes of women voters who freaked out about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. She's attracting all the minorities who will support her just because she's Black or South Asian or whatever part of her race the media is pushing this week. And even though she's 59 years old, she legitimately acts like a sorority girl in college. And she appeals to the young voters. And we have a problem in this country of people caring more about perception and rhetoric and feelings than fucking reality. And the left is banking on this to be the case with this election. And it seems to me that so far, Stephanie, it's working. Like, did you know there's a group called White Women for Kamala?
Are their names Karen?
Well, yeah, kind
Karens
of.
for Kamala.
Karens for Kamala. That's what they call themselves. So last Thursday, they had over 164,000 women come together on a Zoom call. And it was called White Women Answer the Call to support Kamala. And they raised over 2 million in donations, which was even more than the Black Women for Harris Zoom call. Like a few days earlier, that was 40,000 Black women. And like the virtue signaling is out of control. What you just said, Karen's for Kamala, Connie Britton, she's like a famous actress. She was on the call. So was Pink. She was even referring to the group as Karen's for Kamala and was talking about how white women are privileged and they have to come together to fight for equality and selfhood and freedom. And they have to get behind Kamala to lead the charge, right? And let's talk about the money. Kamala's campaign has raised over $200 million in donations in less than a week, which is fucking unheard of. Like by comparison, if you look at the Federal Election Commission filings, Biden barely brought in $63 million for the entire month of June, and his overall total in the bank was $93 million when he dropped out of the race. Trump's campaign brought in $21.5 million over the past month, and his total is somewhere around $128 million. Yet Kamala brought in almost 10 times that in less than a week. And reportedly, her $200 million in donations does not include the money from Biden's campaign. And then according to the New York Post, her campaign is claiming that 66% of those donations are coming from first-time contributors. So at the same time, this article is also pointing out that Kamala's campaign in the last week has brought in over 170,000 new volunteers to their team. They've already planned 2,300 events across battleground states. And if this is true, this also supports everything I just laid out about the voter base that didn't want Biden, but now they're eager to stand behind Kamala. Not to mention, she has the financial backing of major billionaire players and venture capitalists like Reed Hastings, the co-founder of Netflix, the Soros family, Bill and Melinda Gates, former Meta COO Sheryl Sandberg, and like many, many, many others. So when you take a look at all of these factors, I think we're actually facing a much more dangerous situation with the possibility of her actually becoming president than we think.
What world are we living in where Kamala actually has a chance of beating Trump? Like, it's so insane to think about, but I still think it's manufactured. And I want to give a couple examples of how good they are at completely distorting reality. So, one of the things I've been seeing on social media are all these posts about the villages in Florida and how in Central Florida, which is super red, hundreds of people showed up for a Kamala rally. And oh my gosh, social media was going wild. And they were like, Florida's turning blue. Like, this is amazing, blah, blah, blah. And at first I was like, what the heck? Like, how is this happening? But then I looked into it and the social media posts are true. Like, there were hundreds of people from the villages that went to this rally. But we are talking about a senior citizen community of 150,000 people. So the fact that out of 150,000 people, they got a few hundred is actually pretty bad, especially considering these are seniors who moved to this community because it has all of these, community events to go to. So, I mean, with that being considered, I'm surprised more people didn't go just to have something to do for the day. But it's just like they completely are manufacturing this celebrity, in my opinion. Another example of them distorting reality is Kamala and her minions are going around and they're saying, oh, Trump's refusing to debate her and he's backed out of this, September debate. When the reality is, Trump said he will debate her anytime, any place, when the delegates pick her officially as their nominee. So, like, that's a big difference. And it sounds like Trump is just as skeptical as I am about the DNC. But I think it's smart to let her have her little honeymoon and then closer to the election, have the debate and show them the real Kamala. And then in terms of the campaign dollars that you mentioned, I'm sure that Democrats are showing up with strong support now that they have a candidate that doesn't have dementia. And, I feel like historically they've always had the elites and most of the billionaires on their side. So I'm not too shocked with that. But I am worried about women, especially like you said, these white suburban women. But then again, like I was worried about them with Biden because those are like the never Trumpers, right? So I think that Gen Z might actually surprise us. I think there's going to be a lot of new voters, and Gen Z might actually be paying attention to politics more than any other generation thanks to social media. And despite the media trying to make it seem like all young people are these, purple-haired liberals, I think a massive shift has taken place over the past 4 years, and it's no longer cool to be Democrat. And like this whole Kamala is a brat summer vibe or whatever, it might work on some people, that don't have common sense, or maybe they just don't pay attention to politics. But I think that this young generation is a lot smarter than we realize. So Trump's campaign team member, Preston Myers, he gave some interesting stats. He said that Kamala's target demographic is Gen Z voters and millennials. And polls have shown that the majority of young voters get their news from social media. So 60% of TikTok users are Gen Z and 20% are millennials. And then of that, 53.4% are females. So TikTok is basically like her perfect target market. And the way I was looking at this is like, forget what NBC, CNN, or even X says. I think TikTok is probably the best indicator on whether or not she can beat Trump with the young votes that, and the Democrats rely on that. Like they have historically relied on the young voter. And so rather than these polls that are, combined of like 1,000 people, you can see the behaviors of millions of her key demographic. So some of the things that he pointed out in his video was Trump gained 9.2 million likes on his post announcing his TikTok account. Kamala only got 3.6 million on her TikTok announcement, so less than half. Trump has 23.8 million likes on his TikTok content, and Kamala only has 7.2 million likes. So this tells me right away that like young voters are excited about Trump, despite the celebrity and influencer endorsements that are likely paid for Kamala. And then Trump has 9.3 million followers, while Kamala is only at 4 million. And another thing that I was looking at that I think we should pay attention to is the podcast charts to see who people are choosing to listen to. So Tucker Carlson has now surpassed Joe Rogan. Like he is at the top of the charts, which is freaking amazing. And
Yeah.
I mean, to have someone who's like conservative go all the way to the top like this quickly, just crazy. So there's those two, Tucker and Joe Rogan. Then you have Dateline NBC and Jon Stewart, who is a leftist. But then after that, you have Dan Bongino, Ben Shapiro, Megyn Kelly, then leftist Rachel Maddow, but then Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, Morning Wire, Glenn Beck, Matt Walsh. Like clearly people are tuning in to more of the right-leaning podcasts and also tuning into these people that have podcasts versus the mainstream media. And like, I don't trust polls, and I feel like they've always been more left-leaning. So I just try looking at like the big picture and the trends of young voters because I truly think they're going to decide this election. And I think there was a poll, I want to say it was like earlier this year or last year, and it showed like a 10% shift of young voters claiming like that they're now conservative. And so the way I'm looking at this is like if the polls are saying there's a 10% shift and the polls are typically left leaning, then I'd go ahead and assume that the shift is a lot more than 10%. And that's kind of what I'm seeing on social media. And like Trump, for sure, he has young men on his side. Like he has won that demographic 100%. But I think you would be surprised at like how many young women support him. And there's actually this trend going around on TikTok where young women will like show a picture of themselves and it says like, in case you need a reason to unfollow me. And then you swipe and it's a picture of Kamala. And then like in big bold letters, it's like, I do not support her. And it's getting like really popular. And there's so many young people doing this. So I do think that older women, like you were saying, the white Karens are definitely going to support Kamala. They're going to support anyone that's not Trump. But again, it's no longer cool to be Democrat thanks to Biden. So I do think the young voters could vote Trump. I'm just going to throw it out there. The other thing, oh, go ahead.
Let me just say real quick. I hope
Yeah.
you're right, but Kamala's only been on TikTok for like what, 2 days?
Yeah,
Like,
she hasn't been on that long. Her and Trump actually have the same amount of posts, I think. But that's why his campaign, I don't know if it's his manager or just campaign team member, that's why he was like saying comparing apples to apples. So he was comparing Trump's announcement post versus Kamala's. And I don't know if you remember, but like when Trump put that one post, it was in like one day that he got like millions of followers. Like it was
yeah.
just instant. And like I said, I think a lot of it's still manufactured with Kamala because you can technically like pay for people to like your posts and follow you and things like that. And whenever we get people who are big Kamala supporters on our page, like commenting on our posts, every damn time I go to their page and it's a freaking bot. So like you have to take everything with a grain of salt. But the general sense that I get is that there has been a major shift, and it's not instant. Like this shift has been happening over the last 4 years, and I think people are just young people are just sick of the whole Karen virtue signaling, mentality. So the other thing that's interesting is you have historically blue states like Minnesota that are shifting more to the right. So let's listen to this clip from Minnesota Congressman Tom Emmer on Fox News. He's going to talk about Trump's rally in Minnesota and then like the polls and why you can't necessarily trust them.
But the people just love him. Guy, we had people lining up to get into the stadium that holds about 12,000 inside. By the way, the fire marshal had to stop people from coming in because they were getting concerned about overflow. And that thing was packed to the gills, Guy. And then at one point during the president's talk, they showed on a screen behind him an even bigger crowd outside of the arena. I mean, there were thousands of people, and they started showing up at 2 p.m. the day before. Pretty amazing, and his message really solid. It's about economic success again. It's about safety and security in your communities and all across this country and securing the southern border. It's about making sure that we have peace around the globe. It was a great night for Donald Trump, and I expect more in Minnesota before November 5th.
So you're talking about some of that messaging, the economy, immigration. Those are the top two issues in our Fox News poll in Minnesota. 33% of Minnesotans saying the economy is their number one issue, followed by immigration, then abortion. Of course, abortion is going to be an issue that the Democrats are going to try to make hay of. But if you look at the top lines in that same survey, Congressman, Kamala Harris is out to a 6-point lead, kind of similar to what we often see in a state like yours. So is there a chance that your state, a reach state for the Trump campaign, is slipping a little bit out of reach compared to some of the others? And what would Trump need to do to tighten that back up?
No, I think it'll just happen naturally, Guy. You got to keep in mind, they unceremoniously knifed Joe Biden, and it was Obama and Pelosi, people that he's worked with for 50 years. They pushed him over the cliff and got rid of him. Now this party has Kamala Harris. She's actually more radical than Joe Biden could ever be. But that's not what they're talking about now. That's not what they're looking at. What they're looking at is, we have a new candidate. There's new excitement. Next week, they'll probably have a vice presidential candidate. It'll be more Guy. The week after that will be the Democrat National Convention. They'll get more good news. These numbers aren't going to mean much because once you get past Labor Day, once people start using Kamala's own words, which are out there. She is pro-criminal, anti-cop. She is anti-energy, which drives our inflation. In fact, she was the tie-breaking vote for the bill that created the Green New Scam and drove our inflation at 20% over the last 3.5 years. And then, of course, she knows absolutely nothing about what's going on around the world. Much like her presidential run the last time, Guy, as soon as she starts talking after Labor Day, you watch that campaign drop. I think Donald Trump has an excellent chance of being the first Republican presidential candidate to win Minnesota in 50 years.
Well, that made me feel a little hopeful.
I love the way he just kept calling the reporter Guy.
Yeah.
But okay, I have to point out, is Minnesota really shifting? Because Fox also released a poll yesterday showing that Kamala is leading Trump in 4 battleground swing states: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Minnesota. And again, this huge shift is occurring within a 1-week time frame. And before Biden dropped out of the race, Trump was leading by 6 points. And in less than a week of Kamala being fronted as the nominee that's not even completely official yet, Trump is now only leading by 2 points. That is really a huge shift in a short time period. We still have another 100 days to go. And if we've got her campaign volunteers planning thousands of events in these swing states, and she's already gaining traction, and they're attracting young people, there's a lot that can happen in the next few months, especially with these young voters who have not been saying anything because they had already decided they weren't going to vote at all because they didn't like Biden or Trump. And now we have this other option. And like you said on that clip, we don't know who her running mate is yet either. Let's say she chooses someone like Josh Shapiro. Well, he appeals to the blue collar workers. And so that could win her more votes from that population as well. And it's like everything is still so up in the air. And for this much traction to be maybe not real, but delivered to us by the MSM in 1 week, it just makes me worry about the next 100 days.
Yeah. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what happens after Labor Day, like he's saying, if we're going to see things shift, because, typically it's like there is a lot of excitement just in general when there's a big change. So it'll be interesting to see. But then you look at like even New York City, which is super blue. We saw people coming out in large numbers to support Trump at his rally in the Bronx. Now you have a neighborhood being overrun with illegal migrants where people have been murdered. And these people are taking to the streets and like protesting and saying, like, this is unacceptable. It's not safe to walk in our own neighborhood. I would love to know how those people are voting, because it's like, even if you don't watch the news or track what's happening in politics, you can see the difference in crime and safety and, of course, cost of living during 4 years of Trump versus 4 years of Biden Harris. And we also don't know if the pro-Hamas crowd is going to stand with her, just like BLM is standing up and saying that their vote isn't guaranteed. So it's not like I think that either one of those groups are going to go and vote for Trump, but if they simply decide not to vote, or they pick another candidate like RFK Jr. or something, then it's going to hurt her. So I'm kind of interested on what they're going to end up doing.
I don't know if you saw this, and I can't remember where I read it, but I saw something about how RFK made some kind of comment about giving his full support to Trump if Trump gives him a spot on his cabinet, and then Trump's campaign said no.
Really? I thought
Yeah.
I've been hearing the opposite, that Trump offered him like a spot and he's kind of like waiting to see.
Well, it's
So
like we
we'll
can't
have to
believe
look into
anything.
that.
I
I
know. We
know.
can't believe anything that's being reported. But I'm going to play devil's advocate here again. So here's my take on the whole Hamas thing. Like, we know the pro-Palestinian protesters were angry with Biden, and they made that very clear with their Genocide Joe comments. But we haven't seen that same kind of anger directed at Kamala. And in fact, we're starting to see the opposite. Like, look what she did last week with basically slighting Netanyahu and not attending his address to Congress. She did meet with him separately, but she's made it clear that she is supporting Israel, but at the same time, she won't be silent and won't tolerate what's happening in Gaza. And so, whether or not she actually does anything about it from a policy perspective, I think that's irrelevant at this stage in the game, because all she has to do is speak the rhetoric that they want to hear during the next 100 days, and then she will have that youth voter base in her pocket.
But then what's that going to do with all the Jewish voters? Because what did we say? It was like 73% of Jewish people have voted Democrat in the past. So it's like, I feel like she's in a position where she's going to have to make a choice. You either appeal to the pro-Hamas people or you appeal to your Jewish Democrat voters,
And that's why I can also see them using this whole, Israel-Palestine conflict and having her come up with the brilliant arrangement for a
Yeah.
ceasefire, making that
Right.
Kamala's, and then there you go. That's her win right there. And like, it's like you were saying earlier at the beginning of the podcast, she's been the VP for the last 4 years, but she hasn't been in the spotlight. The focus has been entirely on Biden and even other members of his administration. I mean, look, even you and I spend more time talking about KJP over the past 2 years than we have about Kamala. And so, unless you've been paying attention to what she's been doing behind the scenes, most voters don't even know much about her. And so they're starting to pay attention to her for the first time. And what they're seeing is the narrative that the MSM is pushing. So if you've got voters who don't know anything about her, and all they're seeing is that she's suddenly becoming this media darling and gaining all this popularity in the polls, and on top of that, her history is being erased on the internet and everything's being debunked as, misinformation or disinformation, that's just going to add even more to the droves of naive Americans who are going to want to vote for Kamala.
Yeah. And, we have to remember too that she dropped out of the presidential race. Wasn't she the first one to drop out in 2020 because she couldn't secure a single delegate, not one delegate? And so I just keep feeling like the media is going to try and play these games and we can't fall for it. And I really do. I really believe they're manufacturing this whole celebrity status. And I don't know, why we would believe any differently, because all we have to do is look at what they did with Hillary. Like, she was leading in every poll, and like there's no way that Trump would win, and yet he still did. And so I don't know, like I do think the reason they replaced Biden is because they knew if they rigged the election, no one would believe it. But Kamala, with this new manufactured celebrity, I don't know, it's more believable. And maybe that's the game plan. I do think something's going to happen. They're going to pull something, whether it's rigging the election or not having an election or a war or something. But I just feel like this whole thing is manufactured.
Well, yeah, and to your point about her dropping out of the race in 2020 because she couldn't secure a delegate, she has no competition at this point. She doesn't need to secure delegates because she got them by default. So she's like the one hope, unless again something extreme out of the blue happens at the DNC, which it doesn't seem likely at this point with the new rules they have, but who the fuck knows? But she doesn't need to, she doesn't need to do anything. She is it. And I also want to point out, like, just because all the focus is on Kamala right now doesn't mean we're out of the woods with fucking Biden. I mean, we still have another 5.5 months of his policies and procedures, and I feel like he's gonna go out like a child throwing a temper tantrum and like just try to be as destructive as possible. And like his latest move right now is he's planning to call on Congress to make big changes to the Supreme Court, and he's going to be supposedly talking about this later today when he's at the presidential library for the Civil Rights Act thing that we talked about last week. But basically what he wants to do, from what I understand, is impose term limits, impose a code of conduct, and then also have them impose limits on presidential immunity. So he can still do a lot of fucking damage. And then you take him, and if we transition from him right into Kamala, like the all hope is lost for this country if that happens.
Yeah, I'm not feeling too good about things right now. But I mean, it changes day to day. So it's like literally anything can happen. You're absolutely right. And yeah, he can do a lot of damage between now and then. And it's just like, which is worse, that or Kamala stepping in between now and November? Like I feel like there's no good option right now. So we'll keep everyone posted on what's happening and, if anything changes, because stuff is happening by the minute. But thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you to everyone who is going out there and leaving a review for us. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you back here next time. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.